Very often we, on the edges of political discourse, hear much about conspiracy theories. Some are vindicated, but most fall flat on their face and fade into oblivion. Yet there is one big problem with most conspiratorial thinking, namely that they overestimate the capabilities of most organizations. Simply put, many of these conspiracies are too fucking hard to pull off by historical standards, and politics are far too chaotic to be effectively controlled behind the scenes. For example, let's take the Bush did 9/11 conspiracy. We cannot know for sure if Bush did do 9/11, but we can ask ourselves, what would it take for Bush to pull off 9/11? Simply put, the Bush administration would have to convince hundreds of federal agents and soldiers to demolish the World Trade Center and kill 3,000 innocents. Furthermore, thousands of people would have to keep their mouths shut. Here, our only friend is Occam's razor. So which scenario is more likely? 1. Al-Qaeda organized 19 guys to hijack and crash 4 planes because death to America, inshallah. Or George Bush convinced hundreds of bureaucrats to demolish the Twin Towers in order to invade Afghanistan without having one single leak. My argument relies completely on the competence of the Bush administration in organizing secret plots. I am 99.9% convinced that Bush did not do 9/11 because I am 99.99% sure that he could never pull it off. If a truther could prove that the Bush administration had the power to organize such a nefarious plot and keep thousands quiet, then my argument would be invalidated. We can actually see the incompetence of the US government at covering up their own plots with our very own eyes. For example, one of the things that most helped the US in the Gulf War was the testimony of Naraya. The testimony claims that the Iraqi army took babies out of incubators and left them to die. The issue is that this never happened, and this mysterious Naraya was actually the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States. And yet this false testimony would be pretty easy to cover up by any competent government. All that you would need to do is to give Naraya a false identity of some random person in Kuwait and get the government of Kuwait to make some official list of all the names of the babies killed by those heartless Iraqi soldiers. Very few journalists would critically investigate the story, since there are not a lot of journalists in the United States trying to defend the reputation of Saddam Hussein, and yet this was not done because of government incompetence. Am I supposed to believe that this very same government could cover up blowing up the Twin Towers 10 years later? I think not. But in order to delve deeper into this topic, we must first ask ourselves, what is a conspiracy? A conspiracy is a covert action with the intent of increasing one's political power. In the case of the Bush did 9/11 one, he allegedly staged a terrorist attack to have the casus belli to invade Afghanistan, which would lead him to have more political power and boost his approval rating. Indeed, we can see the same pattern in an actual conspiracy 2 years later, the alleged weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. There we can see that the Bush administration created a reason to invade Iraq because they thought that the removal of Saddam Hussein would be a huge political success for them. Everybody loves a victory, and defeating dictators must be good for the approval ratings of a president. A good example of this is how Thatcher defeated the Argentinian junta in the Falklands War, and how this still makes up a large part of the myth of the Iron Lady. But here we arrive at a central question. What is political power? Political power is the ability to make millions of people do things that they would not otherwise do, such as invade Iraq. The issue is that most world leaders do not have the power to telepathically control the actions of their population. At the end of the day, all heads of state, be they presidents or emperors or whatever, are just a person in a fancy office. Political power comes from confidence. When the people of a nation trust in the vision and the words of their leader, this leader has the ability to move millions of them. If tomorrow everybody lost their faith in the leader of a country, he would be rendered as powerless as Romulus Augustulus. So in that sense, the goal of all conspiracy is to create confidence in the leadership of a country. For example, the liberators that stabbed Caesar to death did it because they believed that when they killed this terrible dictator, they would be hailed as heroes, gain the confidence of the people, and would acquire political power. And indeed, all successful governments use conspiracies and political theater to secure their power and fuck over their opponents. I think that the best way to think about conspiracies is to look at them as a power investment. In order to make some plot to increase your political power, you already need to have some political power. If everything goes right for you, you will get more political power out of the conspiracy than you initially invested. In the case of the Iraq War, that was the plan. The Bush administration invested their political power on removing Saddam Hussein, and they hoped that this investment in political power would be profitable. The issue is that it went totally wrong. The US based its whole casus belli on Iraq having a huge stockpile of atomic, biological, or chemical weapons, and they found really nothing of the sort. But most importantly, this war was just not an easy success. Initially, we can see that this war was very popular, and if it had stayed that way, the Bush administration would have pulled off a successful conspiracy. The issue is that as the war dragged on, the invasion of Iraq stopped producing political power and became an ulcer that bled political power. This loss of confidence resulted in a huge Republican defeat in the elections of 2006. So as a rule of thumb, we could say that a certain conspiracy is plausible when its cost in political power is not too high and when there is a clear benefit to be won. In the cases where the political investment is stupidly high or the benefit is too low, we can say that these conspiracies are stupid. An easy example of this is the Flat Earth conspiracy that believes that NASA is desperately hiding the truth of the Earth being flat. In order to fool the entire world that the Earth is not a globe, you would need a lot of political power. But this would generate almost no political power or almost any benefit at all, so why do it? But let's take a more relevant example of a stupid conspiracy. This conspiracy is that Benjamin Netanyahu allowed the October 7th attacks against Israeli civilians in order to secure his political situation. The amount of political power needed to convince hundreds, if not thousands, of Israeli soldiers to let Hamas rape and murder around 1,000 Israeli civilians is astronomical. And Benjamin Netanyahu, whom half the country hates, could not pull it off. Because the benefit of such an operation would be marginal and it would only be enjoyed by a single politician. The cost-benefit analysis simply does not make sense, and therefore this nefarious plot would utterly and instantly fail like Watergate on steroids. The issue with most conspiracies is that the people who believe in them are more interested in the shock value of saying, holy shit, the government did this or that, than in the actual political calculus of conspiracies. Another issue related to this is that most conspiracy theories overestimate the power of money. Money can buy you a lot of things, but it has its limits. For example, a subset of truthers believe that 9/11 was done as an excuse to invade the Middle East for oil money. The issue is that not a lot of people can be bribed into silence, even less into killing thousands, especially when the incentive to betray this conspiracy is being hailed as a hero by most of the country and half of the political establishment. So what kind of conspiracy theories are plausible? All successful conspiracy theories need to be either small operations carried out by a team of professionals or coordinated propaganda campaigns run by a large and competent organization. An example of a small operation is the alleged assassination of Jeffrey Epstein, where one does not need more than a couple of people to carry out a possible assassination out. This is well within the power of some people who could have been implicated in Epstein's questionable activities. Most prominently, former President Bill Clinton, who took many private rides in Epstein's plane, among many others. An example of a larger conspiracy is the already mentioned fake justification for the invasion of Iraq in 2003. In this case, the press, government agencies, and university experts pushed the idea that WMDs in Iraq were a possibility, a very large possibility, in order to justify an invasion. Here we are not talking about small operations, but instead a large effort by institutions to create enough political energy to begin this war. But the reason why so many people believe in so many conspiracies that are totally implausible, as opposed to these two, is that most people have no sense of how politics work. One can only gain a sense of how political power moves by looking at history, and what one immediately sees is that politics have always been utterly unpredictable and chaotic. This means that most conspiracies fail or have great unintended consequences. If we look at the case of the Reign of Terror in the French Revolution, we can see that all political factions are constantly scheming to achieve total power, but later are getting fucked over themselves, and how small details turn out to be giant deadly errors. In the case of Robespierre and the National Convention, the radical Jacobins succeeded in their purge of the moderate Girondins. The issue with using the guillotine on moderates was that the Overton window was shifted, and now the most radical Jacobins were calling for the heads of the least radical. However, Robespierre thought that he had the perfect plan for this situation. He started by purging both the radicals and later the moderates and centralizing power around him and the Committee of Public Safety. The issue is that by purging his own party, he scared everybody else, which led to another coup d'etat that removed and executed him in the Thermidorian reaction. They established a directory that was eventually taken over by Napoleon, who then in time lost his power, and the kings were later restored and would later be again deposed in 1830, and so on and so on and so on. The Reign of Terror and the rise of Napoleon is only a small fraction of the French Revolution. If we can say something about the French Revolution, is that during the whole series of events, from 1788 to 1815, nobody was in total control. Fate and politics led to the rise and fall of a dozen different characters. Can we say that somebody nowadays is in total control? A party, an organization, an ideology? Does everything look like somebody is controlling it? I think not. I think that the world is very chaotic, and everybody wants power, but very few are able to hold it for long. That, I think, is the main reason why I really doubt that anybody is pulling the strings behind our eyes. By no means should this essay be taken as a statement that all conspiracies are false. Of course, there are some that have proven to be true, and there are others that are very possible and even very likely. Without a doubt, the world of politics and geopolitics is full of conspiracies, lies, and plots. However, the problem is that when we talk and say that something is fishy, we are also directly grouped in with Alex Jones. This is a large problem because stupid conspiracy theories provide the perfect reason to dismiss conspiracies that are actually plausible. But the biggest danger is that retarded conspiracy theories actually hurt the right wing because they massively lower the quality of the discourse, and that is the only thing that can save the right wing. We have no prestigious universities or newspapers. We're mostly just anonymous people posting on the internet. If we do not have high quality, we have nothing. And nothing hurts this more than deranged conspiracy theories.